This is gonna go badly. I think it's like, just want to take it.
I'll just like, I'll just hold it like this, yeah. And I'll squat next to you when I need to ask another question.
They actually had one there. It disappeared.
Excellent. Yeah. Can you get cozy? Okay, great. Hi.
Hi.
I feel very lucky to be with you guys today. I'm Veronica Roth. I wrote the Divergent books.
Oh!
And I'm very fortunate to be here with three very talented authors. This is Danielle Paige, and Marie Lu of the Legend books, and Alaya Dawn Johnson, who wrote The Summer Prince, among other things. Yeah. I'm going to give you some bios just very briefly before we start. Danielle Paige lives in New York. Before turning to YA, she worked in television and was nominated for several Daytime Emmy Awards. Dorothy Must Die is her first book. Then we have Marie Lu, who is a US author who works as an art director for a Los Angeles video game company. She was born near Shanghai, but currently lives in California with her boyfriend and their 3 dogs. And she wrote the Legend books, which I just told you. Alaya Dawn Johnson graduated from Columbia University in 2004 with a BA in East Asian Languages and Cultures. She lives in New York City. And The Summer Prince is her first young adult novel. So, yeah. So let's just sit back and absorb their intelligence for a little while. All right, guys, I wanted to ask you, first of all, to tell us a little bit about your books so that we know what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about YA, sci-fi, and fantasy today, just in case you hadn't read the panel description. So, Danielle, you want to start with that?
Hi, my book is Dorothy Must Die. The short version is that it is a book where another girl lands in Oz via tornado and has to fight an evil Dorothy. The long version is that this girl named Amy Gum comes from Mission, Kansas, and her friends, well, she doesn't have any friends, she's bullied, and she's got an awful mom and no dad, and the only place she wants to be is not there. And so when her trailer gets picked up and lands in Oz, she's really happy to be somewhere else. Only Oz is different now. It's dystopian, and the yellow brick road is crumbly, and there's a goth munchkin in the middle of it. So she finds out that Dorothy's evil, and that she has to take her down in order to save Oz. But first she joins an order of revolutionary witches. They are formerly bad, now sort of good. And they want her to first take the Scarecrow's brains, the Lion's courage, and the Tin Man's heart, and then Dorothy must die. I don't know how to share.
Legend is set in a dark, futuristic Los Angeles, and it's about this 15-year-old boy named Day, who is America's most wanted criminal, and he's being hunted down by a 15-year-old girl who is America's most gifted prodigy. And she thinks that this boy has murdered her brother, who's her only family. But of course they discover a lot of things along the way by the government, and it's a 3-part series, so that's it.
So The Summer Prince is science fiction set in Brazil 400 years in the future in a matriarchal society. And every 5 years they elect a king who's this sort of sex god, rock star, political figurehead, and at the end of that year he's ritually killed. But everybody knows this going in. I'm not surprising you, it's not a spoiler there. So it's sort of like, why would you choose to do that, and what would you do with that last year of your life? And when I was writing this book, I told all my friends I was going to write a science fictional sort of dystopia about the transformative power of art, and they all looked at me and said, "Why, no one will buy that book." So I think, you know, some people have bought the book, so they were wrong, and it is about the transformative power of art, but there's all sorts of other things. There's a bisexual love triangle, and all sorts of kind of future politics and the matriarchal society, and of course at the end he's supposed to die, and you know, you have to read it to find out what happens.
All right. Well, the first question I wanted to ask you guys is, a lot of times when people ask me, you know, what inspired your books, I kind of like squinty eye at them, because I'm like, I don't know, is there one thing? But I do know that usually there are a few things that interested me that kind of worked their way into the books, whether they directly inspired it or whether they were just things I was thinking about at the time or absorbing at the time. And I was wondering if you could share what some of those were for you guys. And I'm gonna, hold on, let me shift something. Are you sure? What are you gonna do? Yeah. I have a plan, don't worry about it. Oh, we're gonna share. The most. It'll be pretty I don't know if we get it. Oh, that works. Okay. You can hear us. Okay. What was the question? No. Okay. For me, I guess Dorothy happened because I was thinking about what would happen to her when she goes back from like being a hero and being in Oz and like everyone loves her and she's like done this amazing thing, and then she goes back to Kansas, which is all black and white, and I love OTM and everything, but if your friends don't believe you and you were cool back there, don't you want to maybe go back? So I thought that Dorothy would start to want, and out of that want she became a little less nice. And when she gets back to some stuff happens, and that makes her who she is when you meet her. And it's just hard to find with it. I think that when I first saw The Wizard of Oz, I loved Dorothy, and but I always wondered how she just stayed so sweet the entire, like all these horrible things were happening, and she just was so kind of even keeled considering, and I wanted to play with that.
Have you seen the freaky sequel where there's this evil woman who cuts off her head and then she has a room full of heads? And this is like my favorite thing when I was 10.
I've seen it, and it's actually like based on a character in one of the Oz, like the later Bond books, so it's like it exists in that world.
So it was his idea, the heads in the room?
I don't think the room was all like glass windows like that, like the mirrors, but the heads were his idea, which is brilliant.
Those books are darker than I realized.
Dorothy's in it. Dorothy's good.
Legend was inspired mostly by Les Miserables, and when I say that, I just mean I was vegetating one day, just lying on my carpet, and I was watching Les Miserables on TV. It was like the old movie version with Liam Neeson, and I was just like, it'd be really cool if you had a teen version of this with a teen criminal versus a teen detective. So teen Valjean, teen Javert. So that was the original seed of inspiration for Legend. And I sort of took that idea and put it aside. And a couple of weeks later, I was online, and there was this really interesting map that I saw in some article that showed what the world would look like if all of our freshwater ice melted and the oceans rose by 100 meters. It was just a really fascinating map to see because you saw how all the continents changed, and Europe was just gone. Australia was like 2 Australias, and in the States, there was this huge lake that stretched from LA all the way up to San Francisco. And I live in LA, so my first thought was like, I want to destroy LA. It's kind of sad, like my first thought wasn't, oh, this is so tragic, which it is, but I was like, this is going to be awesome. So I just flooded my city. I mean, LA is a little bit dystopian to begin with, so it wasn't like a huge stretch of the imagination to push a little farther. So I took that and combined it with the idea of teen criminal and teen detective, and that was the beginning of the story.
Yeah, the summer prints, I always have like 20 things that I'm thinking about, and then one day I'm in the bathtub and it's like, eureka! Except, I've been thinking about it for 5 years, but there's all sorts of elements that I have to mature enough until I can put them together. So probably the very first seed of the summer prints came about 5 or 6 years before I even thought of writing it, which was when I visited Brazil with my sister, who had studied abroad there and spoke Portuguese, and my cousin. And my sister was going to São Paulo to study the Japanese-Brazilian for her population there for her thesis in geography. I did not know you could do that for a thesis in geography, but you can. And she spoke Japanese and she spoke Portuguese, and so she went there, and we had an amazing time, explored São Paulo, and I remember walking with them, and we were in a street market, and I saw these women, and sort of backtracking a little bit, like 4 or 5 years before that, I had gone with my father to Ghana and Nigeria. And this was like an amazing experience, and I love eating food in every place I go, and I love especially eating food on the side of the road and food in street markets, and this is just like my favorite thing. And yes, people can talk about how it is perhaps slightly dangerous to your gastrointestinal tract, but I find it, worth occasional discomfort. And so I ate the great food there, and I was walking with my sister and my cousin, and we saw these women selling something. I mean, it was too far away to see exactly what they were selling, but I remember that they were dressed in these white outfits and they had these head wraps on, and they just looked so much like women I had seen selling food on the side of the road in Ghana and Nigeria that I said, oh, Lauren, are they, my sister is Lauren, are they immigrants from West Africa? And she said, oh no, they're from Bahia. And so that was, I mean, I knew, of course, that there were lots of Black Brazilians, and that was like where the samba I love came from and all, you know, all that, but it was the first time I really understood like the differences of the African diaspora there and the way the transatlantic slave trade had kind of worked differently in Brazil. And so it was like this knowledge that there were these people who were from Bahia, and of course it has its own culture, but in some ways it has a stronger connection with West Africa that all our ancestors came from. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind as something like incredibly interesting. I went in and they were selling a food that is actually like fried in palm oil. It's like mashed up black-eyed peas, and it's really delicious, and it really is resembling food that I had in West Africa. And so that was hanging out in my head. And then I wrote, in the meantime, this series about vampires. And I mean, I know vampires don't seem like they have a lot to do with a summer king in dystopian future Brazil that is ritually killed at the end of his year of transformative art, but I was thinking, right, I was thinking, like, why do people love vampires so much? Like, what is cool about someone living for so long? Because it seemed to me that was like probably like the heart of what makes a vampire sexy in some ways. It's like all of that knowledge, like the weight of history. And I'm like, you know, so I wonder if you could reverse it. And and then I was thinking about like the mythology of year kings, which is not something I made up at all. I mean, it's like a long tradition. And I was like, why? Maybe that's the opposite. Like if I was gonna like put up a mirror of a vampire, maybe what I would see is a year king. Somebody whose power comes from the brevity of their life and that choice to live very hot and bright and extinguish themselves. And so when I realized I could put those two things together, that was a Summer Prince, and I just had to write it.
I never would have guessed.
This is the opposite of a vampire book. On purpose.